Okay, hello everyone. I'm sure you've been missing me terribly, but I wanted to record me narrating this PowerPoint because some of the ideas can be a little bit tricky and it's important that we understand them. So what we're going to be looking at today is really the basis of the metaphysical debate. And funnily enough, it really started between Plato and Aristotle. And remember, Plato was Aristotle's teacher. But when it came to metaphysics particularly, they had very, very, very different views. So let's get started. This PowerPoint, by the way, is available in the resource folder, so you can access it there to be able to access the YouTube links that are going to be popping up a little bit later on. Okay. Firstly, we need to start off with some key terms. In the debate around metaphysics, there's sort of two camps. One is the materialist camp and one is the immaterialist camp. So what is materialism? Materialism is the view that reality is made up of what we can see, touch, and taste. There is no other world beyond our senses. So what we're really talking about here is the idea that reality is accessible by our senses. We see it, we touch it, we taste it, we hear it, we smell it. That is the world. There is nothing else. That's all. Okay, there is nothing beyond this physical world around us. A lot of modern day philosophers are materialists, and most scientists are materialists as well, in that they don't believe in something beyond what they can measure or sort of quantify. Immaterialism is different. Immaterialism is the view that reality is not the physical world, but rather a world of concepts or ideas, which is essentially non-physical. This sounds a little bit weird, but to give you an example, think of the shape of justice, or the color of truth, or the smell of beauty. None of these things have any physical presence. We can't explain the shape of justice because justice does not have a shape. Yet we all have a very clear idea of what justice is. Just think about the last time you had a run-in with a teacher or your parents because something wasn't fair. What you're really saying here is that you felt a sense of injustice, even though you can't tell me what justice is or what it looks like. Now, some philosophers would argue the reason that you know what justice is because you are capable of accessing an immaterial world, one that is beyond this physical world. And for Plato particularly, that world is a world of perfect ideas or concepts. So even though justice doesn't exist in the world around us, we can't come into contact with it physically in any way. Plato would argue that you do come into contact with it in other ways, and that is via this immaterial world. It's worth noting that most religions believe in some form of immaterial world. If you believe in life after death, well, we know what happens to your physical body when you die. The material part of you breaks down. If something is living beyond, well, then it must be something that is not material or immaterial, and it must live in a place that is immaterial as well. So hopefully these two concepts are becoming clearer. All right, we'll start off with Plato, and remember, Plato is really where Western philosophy became a subject. Socrates was really good at talking about it and really good at stirring up a bit of trouble in ancient Athens, but Plato was the one who turned it into really the world's first academic subject, something that you studied in school. So for Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher. He lived between 427 and 347 BCE. If that sounds a little bit weird, remember we're in the year 2017. If we go back to 0, then everyone who lived beyond that, we go backwards in numbers. Okay, I know it sounds a little bit odd, but now Plato was an extraordinarily gifted philosopher, and what we say, a prolific writer. He wrote a whole lot of books, and in all of these texts, he covered basically every key question that we have had and still have in Western philosophy, and this includes things like the nature of good and evil, what constitutes a good life, whether we can gain knowledge, and whether we should be religious, the structure of society, everything that we could really think about. Plato was the first to discuss. He was extraordinarily influential in ancient Athens. When we compare him to Socrates, Remember, Socrates was kind of hated during his life. Plato certainly was not. He was kind of the golden child of Athens. So, a very, very important man. His crowning achievement in terms of his philosophical writing is a text simply titled The Republic. If any of you decide to continue studying philosophy into university, I pretty much guarantee you'll come across Plato's Republic at some point or other, because it is his crowning achievement. Within it, Plato outlines his view of the nature of the world and whether or not the perceived world, or this material world, the physical world, is the real one. It is in Plato's Republic that Plato develops the allegory of the cave, which hopefully you remember from us discussing it just before we watched The Matrix. This idea that we are all prisoners, chained in a cave, staring at a cave wall, and what we take to be real is actually just shadowy versions of reality. Okay? In the allegory of the cave, Plato presents his idea of forms. What Plato was trying to do here, he was trying to sort of marry together the materialist world and the immaterialist world. So he is presenting an argument that actually there are two levels of existence. There is a material level of existence, the physical world around us, and then there is another world. Now, in terms of which one is more real, Plato argued that the immaterial world is where true reality is. This is where truth and knowledge actually lives. The physical world, because it's always changing and difficult to define, is imperfect, and so it's a less reliable version of reality. So he referred to this world as the world of being, this immaterial world. Okay, so this is where the perfect forms of all things existed. So essentially what Plato's talking about here is the fact that your mind is able to access this immaterial world that he called the world of being. Within the world of being, our mind can access perfect ideas. So when you say that that's not fair, so you're making a statement about justice, what you're actually doing is your mind is accessing the perfect form of justice in the immaterial world. What you're recognizing in this material world is an imperfect version of that justice, and that's what's irritating you because it's imperfect. But that's the world of being. So Plato argued that the world of being was the eternal world and was where the ideas and concepts that are represented in the material world are actually based. It may interest you to know that this formed the basis of the Christian idea of heaven, which I'll go into later on. There's a YouTube link here. Have a watch of that video, and it will help to explain the idea of Plato's forms. Okay, hopefully the video made things a little bit clearer. But if you're confused at all, let's try a little bit of an activity. What I want you to do is take a couple of minutes to write what you see as the simplest but perfect definition of what a horse is. So this is not a joke. I want you to try it. Try and write down a perfect definition for what a horse is. Go. All right. Hopefully what you've realized is that there's a bit of a problem whenever we do this, in that, well, much of what you wrote about horses can be true of other things as well. So as I've got here, for example, if you wrote that horses are four-legged mammals that are covered in hair with a long face, well, you've also explained what a German Shepherd is. Or a giraffe, for that matter. So this is a difficult thing to try and define, and if you think about it, there's really no way that you can perfectly define a horse unless you say, well, a horse is a horse and it's not any other animal. Obviously, there's a problem with this definition. We can't use the word in our definition. But that's not how we understand the world. We don't commonly look at a German Shepherd and think, oh, is that a horse or a dog? We know the difference between a dog and a horse. And Plato argued that the reason that you know the difference between these is because, now follow me, your mind is able to access the perfect form of what a horse is from the world of being. In other words, in the world of being, there is the perfect idea of what a horse is. You can't explain it. You can't write it down. You can't tell someone what the idea of a perfect horse is, but you recognize it in the physical world. When you come across a horse, what you're really doing is recognizing the elements of a perfect form of a horse, and that's what allows you to see a horse and not a dog. Make sense? Essentially, when you access the world of being, you are accessing truth. You're just trying to apply it to this world that we exist in. The form of horse, the one that you're looking at, is in the world of becoming. So that's the world that is the material world, the physical world. So Plato called the world around us the world of becoming, which is real, but not as real, not as true as the world of being, the immaterial world. A good example of something that only exists in the immaterial world is mathematics. Mathematics is based purely on ideas, and if you've never thought about it, let's take geometry as an example. We can measure all of the elements of a perfectly round circle. So we can measure its diameter, we can measure its circumference, we can calculate a whole range of things to do with a circle. It may interest you to know that there has never, ever, ever, ever been a circle before. If this sounds weird, draw a circle in your book. Now, is it perfectly round? Probably not. Let's assume you used a device to help you to draw, like a circular coin or something like that. Well, now look at the line really, really clearly. Is it a smooth line or is it jagged? In essence, we've never, ever, ever actually had a perfect circle ever exist in reality in this material world. Plato argued that, well, how can we measure things to do with a circle if we've never actually experienced it? This is because the form of a circle exists in the immaterial world, in the world of being. In these two worlds, the world of becoming is where our physical self is, and it's always changing and imperfect. It is the world you can touch and taste. The world of being is where our soul or our mind comes from, and it is permanent and unchanging. It's a world of perfect and eternal ideas. So essentially, your body will change. This physical world will change. Your mind, or your soul, as Plato referred to it, will never change because it comes from the world of being. It is the perfect part of you. Within the world of being was the ultimate form, which Plato called the good. So if you remember in Plato's cave, this was represented by the sun. The good is the form that illuminates and makes all other forms possible. Remember, when the prisoner is dragged out of the cave or crawls out of the cave, depending on if he's coming willingly or not, the sun hurts his eyes. If your brain is hurting a little bit from trying to define a horse and not write down a definition that also fits another animal, well, this is the equivalent of your eyes hurting when you're looking at the sun for the first time. Remember Morpheus's comment to Neo when he is first woken up. Neo says to Morpheus, "Why do my eyes hurt?" And Morpheus says, "Because you've never used them before." So very, very, very Platonic thing to be talking about from Morpheus there. As I said, Christian belief has borrowed a lot from Plato, and where in Plato's allegory of the cave, the sun is referred to as the good, which illuminates all things and provides us with truth. In the Christian faith, that was adjusted, and they dropped an O in good and turned it into God, and so God is what illuminates truth and provides understanding for us. So this Plato's works was borrowed, we'll say, by Christianity to allow them to explain some of these difficult concepts by making slight adjustments and kind of adding God. But as you can see, with the idea of two separate worlds, it's not that difficult to put the idea of religion into this. And Plato certainly would have been religious in his day. So we'll stop the video here, and I'll do a second recording for the second half of this PowerPoint, which is then on Aristotle. As you can see, take a little bit of time, complete the write activity on page 94 of your textbook.